give me the heads up. So I'll start this one paragraph again. Basically, it's a period of exceptional growth and development. In East Texas, the Tejanos, who had been driven from their homes, have returned, while in the South, Tejanos begun to build up ranches and other settlements. And in the areas in between, basically Anglo-Americans, encouraged by a generous immigration policy, made their way into Texas. I mean, under Mexican Texas, they were able to do what Spain wasn't able to do. Basically, get people up here to Texas and get it prosperous. Indeed, there's one really interesting work by Amarango called Tejano Empire, where he argues that basically, I mean, it's a really good book, a really curious argument, might be true, a really nice guy, but he basically argues that what was going on in San Antonio with the ranching community was so vibrant that Mexico really didn't need to have the foreign settlement come in, because if the Mexican ranching had remained unfettered and continued to grow, it would have done what the Anglo-Americans have been able to achieve in conjunction with Mexico. Now, the first thing we've got to look at is the Empire of Mexico. There have been 3 years of autocratic rule and 10 years of war and strife, made it a difficult time for transition to a stable form of government. I mean, the army, conservatives, and others were fearful of popular rule. Guys, I don't think you understand how crazy it is. Democracy is incredibly frightening. Think about it. Everybody has the same vote. You have the same vote as Bill Gates. Her vote is equal to Lady Gaga. But also, your vote is just as the same as, a guy who's basically not that mentally smart and homeless. Your vote's equal to his. And we're the people who are voting for the most powerful person in the world at this time. And guys, this is just like America after our revolution, even though we, thankfully, had much more of a tradition of self-rule. So that kind of mettered our excitement. But basically what they thought was the best thing to do was they appointed Augusto Iturbide to emperor and create a monarchy patterned after the European nobility. The Bishop of Guadalajara blessed him, and his power was based basically on the military for support. And needless to say, within a few months, he's not that popular anymore, and he gets thrust out. Ready to go to the next slide? The old 300. Now, basically, Anglo-American immigration began during Iturbide's time in government. During the winter of 1821-22, first settlers began to arrive in Texas, with the very first being Andrew Robinson. He arrived in Brazoria in November of 1821. Eventually, he established a ferry business at the settlement of Washington on the Brazos. Within days, 3 more had arrived and settled near present-day Independence. And not long after that, a businessman, capitalist, and a planner from Alabama, Jared E. Gross, arrived with more than 50 wagons and more than 90 slaves. They settled on the rich lands near Hempstead, modern day Hempstead. Now, guys, that's one of the things we could talk about. When y'all did your, when you were looking at the census of Spanish Texas, did any of you notice anything about the slaves?
There were like 19 male slaves and like 17 female slaves.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of them. And what was the place that had the most slaves? You may remember?
I think it was the first one, right?
San Antonio. And most of those were women. Now, what do you think the women slaves did? Why didn't Texas have a lot of slaves under Spain? Well, what were the slaves used for in America? Mainly labor. For cotton or tobacco, the cash crops that demanded a whole lot of labor. Okay? Well, why didn't Spanish Texas have a lot of slaves? Was there a lot of farming going on in Spanish Texas? Well, I mean, the Indians did some, but not the massive agriculture and stuff like that was going on in the American South. And so that's one of the reasons, and the reason why most of the slaves were female in San Antonio is basically they were house slaves. It'd be like, the maids, the cooks, stuff like that. Austin's, let's see. By March of 1822, there were 50 people living on the Brazos, more than 100 on the Colorado, who were building houses and planting farms. So to help build up his infrastructure even more, Stephen F. Austin. I don't know why I always say Stephen F. Austin, because I think if I said Stephen Austin or just Austin, nobody in here would say, who? Which Stephen Austin is he talking about? Stephen F. Austin's partner in New Orleans, Joseph Hawkins. He basically was a front man to get the colonists, over here to Texas. He bought a ship, the Lively. It was a little schooner. It had 18 settlers and supplies for the colonies. And Austin, they were supposed to go to the Colorado River. Austin goes to the Colorado River to wait for them. They never show up. Why didn't they show up? Because they mistook the Brazos, the mouth of the Brazos as the Colorado River. When Austin wasn't there, it really freaked out a lot of the colonials and they wanted to go home. Now wait a minute, why would the colonials be scared? Why would these people from America be scared of coming to Texas?
It's a frontier, so he might have gotten killed or they think that he might have.
Well, I mean, they got frontier in America. I mean, they probably wouldn't be as scared of moving like out to Missouri, right? Well, why would they be so scared about coming to Texas? Who owns Texas at this time? In this lecture called Mexican Texas, who owns Texas? Mexico. It's not even American. Guys, Americans are willing to go to a foreign country. They are leaving everything. Well, that's because conditions are so bad in America, though, because of the Panic of 1819. It's like either I can starve or, hey, they got a heck of a lot of great farmland. And by the way, costs about 10 times less as what I'd pay for that land in America.
Yeah, but you don't speak Spanish.
I don't care.
You gotta be Catholic.
I don't care. Then Austin has to get political. Why? Because in March of 1822, he goes to San Antonio to report the progress of his colony to the governor of Texas. And it is there that he learns, oh, by the way, we're not Spain anymore. Now we're Mexico. He learns of the Mexican Revolution. He also learns from the Spanish governor, Martinez, that officials in Monterrey had refused to recognize Austin's authority to introduce settlers. But he knew that the government in Mexico was discussing colonization plans for both Texas and California. Well, Stephen Austin ain't no fool. He goes to Mexico City, reaching there in March of 1822. And of course, so he patiently and methodically set out to secure the approval of his contract. But many weeks passed before he would succeed. I mean, Austin doesn't waste his time. He goes about, learns the rudiments of Spanish, learned about Spanish politics. He talked to Iturbide's junta, delegates from his junta. Make sure you get a paper towel. About the possibility of a general colonization law. He met with other impresarios. Finally, the imperial colonization law was passed on January 4th, 1823. But Austin can see that Iturbide's power is really on the wane, meaning it's fading away. So he doesn't dare leave the city, because on March 19th, 1823, Iturbide abdicates the throne. And basically now we kind of have a pro-ad interim government with a Congress that was very favorable to Austin. Because guys, remember, Mexico desperately wanted people to populate Texas. Because we were a buffer state against the United States of America. He got land from the seashore to the San Antonio Nacogdoches Road. And basically from the Lavaca River to the San Jacinto River. And by August of 1823, Austin was given permission to hand out titles to his settlers. So the Baron de Bastrop, who was Austin's land commissioner, goes out and starts delivering those titles. To the settlers living on the land. And by 1824, Bastrop had issued 272 land titles. And eventually the number of families that will have received those titles was 297. We call these guys the old 300. Now, don't get me wrong, I mean, those early settlers, the old 300, they actually had times pretty tough. I mean, in 1822, they were hit by a drought. Comanche attacks also plagued the colony, forcing a lot of the colonials to leave. This is before they had titles. And I'm like, too much for me. I'm out of here. Now, a seat of government was established for Austin's colony at San Felipe d'Austin. And like I already told you, by the summer of 1824, 272 land titles, eventually reaching 279, thereby fulfilling Stephen F. Austin's first impresario contract by the old 300. Now, what were the settlers getting out of the imperial colonization law, which was the law basically where they colonized? Well, you could either, if you said you were a farmer, you would get 177 acres of land. However, if you said you were a rancher or raising stock, like cattle, you could get 4,428 acres. So, needless to say, most of the people that came down here, even though they were farmers, they said no, we're ranchers, because only 20 of the titles, of those 297 titles, were farming titles. Now, you had to live on the land and improve it for 2 years. You had to be a Catholic. But for 6 years, you were totally exempt from tithes and from import duties. It's like a tax-free weekend. Oh, but it's 6 years. But if you bring slaves with you, and those slaves have kids, once they reach 14, they have to be given their freedom. Now, why do you think Mexico would make such a sweet deal for colonists? Well, why do bars have ladies' night? Half off drinks for ladies. Why are they being nice to the ladies?
It's gonna attract them in.
Yeah, because if the ladies are there, the men are going to show up. Guys, why are they making this deal so good?
People to move.
They want to get people to come. They desperately need people to populate Texas. Now, wasn't that last thing curious, though? About children of slaves being freed once they were 14? What would that do to slavery? Eventually. You know, like if, you know, you still have those slaves. And also it's kind of good because it's not going to economically cripple the slave owners. But it is eventually going to eradicate slavery, hopefully. Now, the Republic of Mexico. Now, once again, now that Iturbide is thrown out, they realize that whole emperor thing wasn't the greatest of ideas. What the heck are they going to do? There's a huge, big argument between having central power and authority, a strong central power, versus federal power. No, you give the power to communities, to states. Guys, this is just like in the U.S. after our revolution. Now, why is it better to have power in like the cities and the states, and then eventually, yeah, the national government? In a democracy and in a republic, why might it be better to have federal power at the local level? Well, guys, guess what's coming up in what, 2 months? Elections. You're going to be voting on a lot of levels in those elections if you register to vote and you decide to vote, which I hope you do. And if you do, then go to the League of Women Voters website and print out a ballot, because it has all it's totally nonpartisan. It has all the people that are running for office, tell you a little bit about them. If they send something into the website, they'll put it in there. And it gives you a kind of idea who the candidates are. So you don't go in going, hey, okay, I haven't voted for someone with a J in their name. But guys, where does your vote have the most power? At city planning. Where does, still have power, but state level. Well, county. Then we go state. Then we go national. Guys, at the national level, your vote is still incredibly important. But there are so many votes. The most power your vote has is at the local level. And that's basically, I mean, if you're the wealthy, like if you're one of the haciendos, in the military or the clergy, you like the thought of power being centralized, where it's the same uniform rules for everybody down the line. If you're in the middle class and the poor, however, you don't have all these contacts, everything like that. You like to change things where you are. So basically, they write up the Constitution of 1824. It's a very liberal document. And in many respects, this Constitution reflected the Constitution of the United States of America. Mexico was divided into 19 states and 4 territories. The power of the federal government was divided into the executive, legislative, and judicial. One item, however, that could lead to problems was that the president was given the emergency power where he could basically claim there was a crisis going on, and he could basically possess dictatorial powers until the crisis was over. But of course, he was the guy who decided when the crisis was over. And Mexico's very first, the Roman Catholic Church was made the religion of the nation. Special privileges were also given to members of the military and clergy. And the first guy to be elected president was Guadalupe Victoria. But before he's even put in, we get in trouble. Now, Texas had actually participated in the organization of the Republic as well as our new state government. Like Erasmo Seguin was a member to the Constituent Congress that wrote the Constitution of 1824. Now, the only problem is one of those little territories was Texas. Why? Because our population was so small. Because we were so small, we were joined together with Coahuila y Tejas, on May 7th, 1824. And we were to be joined to our sister state until such a time as economically we could support ourselves. The Baron de Bastrop represented Tejas in the Congress. In Coahuila, we had one representative, they had 11. Texas basically was a department of Coahuila. And the governor of Coahuila chose who was going to be our governor here in Texas. We in turn were divided. We in turn divided ourselves into 3 departments. There you go. The Department of San Antonio, the Department of Nacogdoches, and the Department of San Felipe. So like 3 sub-states within the state of Texas. A new colonization program. The National Colonization Law of August 18th, 1824. So it was one of the laws passed early in the Mexican Congress. And by this act, basically, the national government gave the power of regulating colonization to the states. Basically authorizing states to prescribe regulations of the settlements, with only a few reservations. The most important of these were that all state laws had to conform to the Mexican Constitution, that except by special approval of the federal executive, foreigners were not to settle within 10 leagues of the coast or 20 leagues of an international boundary. No person could own more than 11 stilos. No alien or somebody who wasn't a citizen could receive a land grant. And basically, until after after 1840, the Congress of Mexico could not prohibit the entrance of any foreigner as a colonist with respect to individuals of a particular nation. So in other words, hey, Mexico, our central government, we can't mess with anybody coming in until after 1840. Now, why do you think they passed that? Why would, this is an odd law, why would they pass that? Saying that the Congress couldn't prohibit the entrance of any foreigner as a colonist with respect to individuals of a particular nation. Why would they do that? What are they trying to get here?
More people.
They're trying to get more people. This is their way of saying, hey guys, we're going to be cool. Come on over. Because guys, it's a huge risk moving to another nation to start a new life. And by the way, you don't speak the language, or you might just speak a little bit of it. You're going to be miles, you'll never see your family again. Okay? This is a huge deal. And once again, things are so bad in the United States. From the Panic of 1819 or the Depression of 1819, we don't get over it for 7 years. So people are still kind of hurting in the U.S. Well, what was the state colonization law? Well, basically, on March 24th, 1825, the legislature of Coahuila y Tejas passed the Coahuila Tejas colonization law. Basically, this law required immigrants to give satisfactory evidence of their Christian or Catholic faith, their morality, and good habits. Immigrants could either get titles by themselves, appealing to the government, or they could work through an impresario. Stephen F. Austin was an impresario. What's an impresario? Ebby Holiday, while she was alive, would have been considered an impresario. K.B. Holmes is an impresario. What are they? They're real estate men. They know the ways through the laws. They, like Stephen F. Austin, he went out, surveyed all his land, had everything ready for the settlers to come in and settle. That was his job. Now, after the initial payment, guys, you had to pay like $30 down. That's it. You'd pay $30 down, you'd get 4,428 acres for just $30. You had to occupy the land for 6 years. Oh, and by the way, after you paid that $30 initial payment, no interest, no payments for 4 years. Then you had to start paying it back. And colonists, of course, are exempt from taxes for 10 years and from customs duties for 7. So guys, this is an incredible deal for Americans. And by the way, if you were a citizen of Mexico, you could also get this, because one of the impresarios that we'll talk about, Martín de León, who started the town of Victoria, basically he was the most successful Mexican impresario. The expansion of colonization, then the new colonization law, many became excited to become impresarios in Texas. Stephen F. Austin, who had already fulfilled his 300 family contract, was eager to get new lands. In 1825, he received a contract to settle 500 more families within his lands. In 1827, he received permission to settle 100 families in the little colony of lands immediately above his original lands. And that whole thing about the impresarios not having land near the coast, that didn't apply for Stephen F. Austin because he had already been in. He was kind of grandfathered in. And due to this, Austin successfully petitioned for and received permission to establish 100 families in the coastal strip between the Lavaca and San Jacinto rivers. And by 1828, Austin had successfully settled 1,200 families. And in March of 1828, the population of his colony was 2,021. By June of 1830, the population was 4,288. So he was doing good. Meanwhile, the second most successful American impresario was Green DeWitt. Who had received a contract in 1825 to settle 400 families in his land grant. His capital city there was named Gonzales, after the Mexican governor. But within the first year of his colony opening up, that city was burned to the ground in a raid by Comanches. Some of his families tried to settle on the richer land near the coast, where he ran into difficulties with the Mexican impresario Martín de León. And problems continued to plague him, and at the end of his contract, on April 13th, 1831, 166 titles had been issued to the people of his colony. Then we have Martín de León, who had fair success as an impresario. He was a native and rancher of the Spanish province of Nuevo Santander. Basically, it's a province that was kind of in the area between the Nueces and the Rio Grande rivers. De León visited Texas in 1805 and moved his operation up to the vicinity of San Patricio. He cooperated with the Republicans in the Mexican Revolution, not the Royalists. And in April 1824, under the colonization plan of Iturbide, he received permission to settle families. Even though he wasn't given the specific numbers of families he had to settle, he did settle 41 families near the coast. He laid out his capital city, Guadalupe, Victoria, which is modern-day Victoria. And by 1833, his population was more than 200. Now, the state had made 22 had made 22 other contracts with impresarios under the law of March 24th, 1825, calling for a total of about 8,000 families. But a great number of these impresarios brought in no families or a very small number. Y'all heard I lost my job at the keyboard factory? Yeah, my boss said I wasn't putting in enough shifts. Ah, see what I did there? You kids, with your comedy. Then we have the Fredonian Rebellion. Basically, in 1825, Hayden Edwards received an impresario grant to lands out in East Texas. He goes out there and he finds out that there's people living on the land out in East Texas that he's supposed to settle other families on. Well, he's kind of ticked off about it, so he demands that the families that are living on the land, that they got to show them their titles to the land. Either prove title or they need to get out of there. Now, these guys have been living on the land for generations, and Stephen F. Austin is telling Edwards, hey, take a chill pill, but he doesn't. He's really strong about doing this. So basically, the settlers, they cry, word gets up to Mexico City, what Hayden Edwards is doing, and he gets thrown out of Texas, and his contract is revoked.
I didn't sign it, I don't think she signed it, and he didn't sign it. Yeah,
Anybody else?
no, we just got avoided, it's fine.
No, it's not fine, because you're precious, and you're important, and everybody loves you.
We didn't go that far.
Well, they don't feel hostile towards you. Would you agree to that?
So far.
There we have it.
Here you go.
Now, everything might have gone along okay, but in December 16th of 1826, Hayden's brother, Benjamin Edwards, along with just 15 to 30 armed men, ride into Nacogdoches, are able to take over the town, and they proclaim the Republic of Fredonia. And in response to this, Mexico goes, are you serious? Are you serious? They send up some of their army. Stephen F. Austin, he sends up a militia unit from his own colonists to basically march and kick out Benjamin Edwards. Edwards hears about this, he says, oh shoot. And he basically hightails it out of Texas, crossing the Sabine River by January 31st of 1827. Now, first off, why do you think Stephen F. Austin sent a militia unit? When nobody told him to do that. Who most of Stephen Austin's colonists comprised of what? People from what nation? Y'all don't know where most of the people, I didn't tell you, the old 300, they came basically from the U.S. The South. All these people are coming from the U.S. Then you have these crazy brothers that run in and do this. They're from the U.S. They're saying, hey, we're gonna take this over from Mexico. Stephen F. Austin has a good thing going. He's selling more than 1,200 people. He doesn't want this guy ruining his trip. He's like, hey, I'm in Mexico. I like it, Mexico. Well, does Mexico pay attention to that? No. Now, all of a sudden, letting the floodgates open and letting all these colonists come in, especially from the U.S., seems like it might be a bad idea. And they send one of their generals, Manuel Tejas, to go up and make a report about everything, what he finds out about what's going on in Texas. Thus endeth the lesson. Make sure y'all remember you got a quiz today. Basically lasts from